Dear listener, welcome anew to the Hercule Poirot Story Podcast, where the veils of deception are parted by the keenest of intellects. This evening we transport you to Ravenswood Hall, a stately home perched upon the rugged cliffs of Sussex, England, in the shadowed year of 1930. The sea crashes relentlessly against the rocks below, and a relentless fog enshrouds the estate, mirroring the murky depths of human duplicity. Amidst this brooding atmosphere, a pernicious crime unfolds, the demise of Lord Archibald Thorne, the esteemed diplomat whose correspondences once shaped empires. As the mist thickens and secrets unfurl like poisoned parchment, we implore you, dear listener, to engage your own faculties. Share your deductions in the comments, for perhaps together we shall illuminate the darkness. Let the tale commence. Chapter 1. The Ominous Missive. In the grandiose confines of Ravenswood Hall, perched precariously upon the rugged cliffs of Sussex, England, during the shadowed autumn of 1930, the evening had unfolded with a veneer of genteel tranquillity, belying the undercurrents of malice that swirled beneath. The hall itself was a Gothic masterpiece of weathered grey stone, its arched windows gazing out over the tumultuous English Channel, where waves crashed relentlessly against the jagged rocks below. Their roar a perpetual symphony of nature's indifference. Towering turrets pierced the encroaching fog that rolled in from the sea, enveloping the estate in a shroud of mystery, while the wind whistled through the crevices like the whispers of long-forgotten ghosts. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished oak and beeswax candles, their flames flickering in ornate sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced upon the tapestried walls as if enacting a prelude to the tragedy about to unfold. At the heart of this opulent domain, in the library, a sanctum of intellectual grandeur where shelves groaned under the burden of leather-bound volumes chronicling the annals of diplomacy and empire, sat Lord Archibald Thorne, the victim whose fate would soon ensnare all in a web of suspicion and deceit. Archibald, a man of 58 years, was a diplomat of unparalleled renown, his correspondences having once swayed the destinies of nations in the hallowed halls of Whitehall. His physical presence commanded respect, stern features chiselled by decades of negotiation and intrigue, silvered hair swept back with meticulous care, and hazel eyes that gleamed with the acuity of a strategist perpetually one move ahead. Psychologically, Archibald was a fortress of ambition, his ego buttressed by triumphs in foreign policy that had earned him peerage and prestige, yet undermined by a paranoia born of past betrayals, alliances shattered, secrets leaked that rendered him ever vigilant, his trust a commodity rarer than the finest jade. On this fateful eve, as the grandfather clock in the hall tolled 9 with resonant solemnity, Archibald reclined at his massive mahogany desk, its surface cluttered with inkwells, seals, and stacks of parchment. He had just received a missive via the evening post, its envelope bearing an unfamiliar crest, sealed with crimson wax that gleamed ominously under the lamplight. With his silver letter opener, a relic from his days in Constantinople, he slit the seal, a faint dusting of powder escaping like a malevolent sigh. Unfolding the letter, his eyes scanned the elegant script, his brow furrowing in consternation. The contents, though cryptic, hinted at revelations that could unravel his meticulously woven career. Adjoining the library was the salon, a chamber of refined elegance furnished with velvet settees and crystal decanters, where the household and select guests had gathered for postprandial discourse. The fog pressed against the windows like an uninvited spectator, muffling the distant crash of waves and infusing the room with a chill that no roaring fire could dispel. Here the suspects lingered, each harbouring motives as opaque as the mist outside. Lady Victoria Thorne, Archibald's wife of 2 decades, perched upon a chaise longue with the poise of a porcelain doll. At 45, she exuded an ethereal elegance. Alabaster skin that glowed in the firelight, raven hair coiled in an elaborate chignon that accentuated her swan-like neck, and sapphire eyes that sparkled with intelligence often cloaked in decorum. Once a luminary of London's social whirl, her aspirations had been eclipsed by her husband's relentless pursuits, relegating her to the shadows of Ravenswood. Her psyche was a cauldron of bitterness, stirred by years of emotional neglect and rumours of Archibald's discreet liaisons during his travels. This resentment festered, manifesting in subtle barbs and private reveries of liberation, perhaps through widowhood, where she might reclaim her autonomy and the estate's fortunes. Lounging indolently by the marble mantelpiece, his reflection warped in the gilded mirror above, was Edward Thorne, Archibald's son from his first marriage. Aged 32, Edward cut a lanky, dissolute figure, tousled auburn hair that defied grooming, a perpetual shadow of stubble upon his angular jaw, and brooding brown eyes that betrayed a soul adrift. A dilettante by inclination, his ventures into business and speculation had invariably faltered, leaving him mired in debt and reliant upon his father's begrudging subsidies. Psychologically, Edward was a vortex of entitlement and grudge. He viewed the Thorne legacy as his birthright, resenting his stepmother's influence and his father's parsimony. His mind teemed with schemes, forged documents, clandestine borrowings, each a desperate gambit to secure the inheritance he believed imminent. Attending to a side table with diligent precision was Miss Clara Beaumont, Archibald's secretary of 29 years. Slender and poised, with golden curls cascading beneath a modest headband, porcelain features framed by wire-rimmed spectacles, and intelligent grey eyes that absorbed every detail, Clara embodied the archetype of efficient devotion. Hired for her linguistic prowess and shorthand mastery, she had become indispensable in managing Archibald's voluminous correspondence. Yet, beneath this veneer of professionalism, simmered a secret infatuation, born of intellectual communion during late-night dictations. Her soul was a delicate equilibrium, balancing unwavering loyalty with the poignant ache of unreciprocated affection, which could, in moments of vulnerability, escalate into acts of possessive folly. Pacing the room with the rigid gait of a soldier was Colonel Reginald Fairfax, a rival diplomat of 55. Burly and imposing, with cropped grey hair streaked from years under tropical suns, a jagged scar marring his left cheek from a Boer War skirmish, and steely blue eyes that pierced like bayonets, Fairfax exuded an aura of martial authority. Once Archibald's colleague in colonial negotiations, a thwarted treaty had seen Fairfax sidelined, his career stagnating while Archibald ascended. His psychology was that of unyielding honour, warped by defeat. A man whose sense of justice demanded restitution, his thoughts often drifting to vengeance as the salve for his tarnished reputation. Bustling about with trays of Earl Grey and delicate biscuits was Mrs. Agnes Croft, the housekeeper of 48. Stout and matronly, with greying hair pinned severely in a bun, ruddy cheeks flushed from exertion, and shrewd dark eyes that missed little, Agnes was the linchpin of the household's operations. Years of service had honed her efficiency, but also brewed resentment toward Archibald's imperious demands, deductions for minor infractions, dismissals of her counsel. Her psyche concealed a reservoir of suppressed fury, fermented by overlooked dedication and the quiet indignities of servitude. As the clock chimed 10, its tolls reverberating like a knell, Archibald's perusal of the letter was interrupted by a sudden gasp. A faint powder, insidious and unseen, had been inhaled upon breaking the seal. Convulsions seized him. He clutched his chest, his face contorting in agony as prussic acid coursed through his veins, inducing instantaneous cardiac arrest. He slumped forward, lifeless, the missive fluttering to the floor. Victoria, drawn by the thud, entered first, her scream shattering the repose. "Archibald! Oh, merciful heavens!" Edward rushed in, feigning shock. "Father, what devilry is this?" Clara knelt beside him, tears cascading. "The letter, it must be cursed!" Fairfax approached warily. "Poison, by the scent, a sinister missive indeed." Agnes summoned the staff, but the fog had isolated the hall. Telephones faltered in the damp. A messenger braved the cliffs to alert the village constable. By the following morn, as the fog lifted reluctantly, Hercule Poirot, summoned from a nearby retreat, was apprised. Arriving in his chauffeured motor car, the Belgian detective alighted with characteristic aplomb. Egg-shaped head held high, moustache waxed to perfection, green eyes surveying the scene with unerring acuity. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, examining the desk. "A fatal correspondence, but Hercule Poirot shall unravel this pernicious puzzle with the little grey cells." Thus commenced the inquiry, the hall's secrets poised to unfurl like the poisoned parchment itself. Chapter 2. Veils of Suspicion. As the first tentative rays of dawn cleaved through the persistent fog enveloping Ravenswood Hall, the estate emerged from the night's embrace like a spectral apparition. Its Gothic turrets silhouetted against a sky bruised with hues of indigo and slate. The English Channel below continued its eternal lament, waves hurling themselves against the cliffs with unyielding ferocity, their thunderous crashes a dirge that underscored the pall of death now hanging over the household. The fog, thick and insidious, clung to the stone facade like a shroud, muffling sounds and distorting visions, as if conspiring to obscure the truths buried within the hall's labyrinthine corridors. Inside, the air retained a chill that seeped into the bones, the servants moving with subdued footsteps, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and trepidation, while the scent of extinguished candles mingled with the faint acrid tang of the previous evening's tragedy. Hercule Poirot, having ensconced himself in the library at first light, commenced his examination with the meticulous rigour that had rendered him indispensable in the annals of detection. Accompanied by the local constable, a stout man named Hargreaves, whose florid countenance bespoke a fondness for ale, Poirot surveyed the scene of Lord Archibald Thorne's demise. The mahogany desk, still bearing the imprint of the fallen diplomat, was dusted with a fine powdery residue, remnants of the prussic acid that had claimed his life upon inhalation. Poirot's keen green eyes, magnified by his pince-nez, alighted upon a faint footprint embedded in the carpet's plush pile, its outline delicate and feminine, suggesting a shoe of smaller proportions. Further scrutiny revealed a smudged impression upon the envelope's wax seal, as if tampered with by a gloved hand or hasty fingers, hinting at premeditation rather than mere misfortune. "Observe, Constable," Poirot remarked, his accent a melodious fusion of Belgian exactitude and acquired English polish. "The powder, it disperses unevenly, indicative of embedding within the seal. And this footprint so subtle amid the dust, perhaps a lady's tread, no? the veils of suspicion begin to lift, yet more obscure the path. Hargreaves nodded ponderously, his notebook at the ready, as Poirot catalogued additional anomalies. A slight disarray in the desk drawers, as though searched post-mortem, and a lingering aroma of lavender, incongruous with Archibald's masculine cologne. Satisfied with his preliminary survey, Poirot decreed that interviews with the suspects commence forthwith, to be conducted in the salon, a chamber of subdued elegance, its velvet settees arranged before a roaring fire that crackled ominously in the grate, casting flickering shadows that seemed to mimic the evasion soon to unfold. Lady Victoria Thorne entered first, her ethereal elegance undiminished by the ordeal, though a subtle tremor in her alabaster hands betrayed inner turmoil as she seated herself upon the chaise longue. "Monsieur Poirot," she intoned, her voice a contralto laced with feigned sorrow, "this calamity has descended upon us like the fog itself, unforeseen and suffocating. Archibald had his adversaries, remnants of diplomatic intrigues, but to perish by such an insidious device, it is monstrous." Poirot inclined his egg-shaped head sympathetically, his moustache twitching as he appraised her. "Madame, the human heart conceals depths as profound as your channel's abyss. Threats, you say, elaborate, if you please, and your whereabouts during the receipt of this fatal missive?" Victoria's sapphire eyes flickered evasively, a psychological clue that Poirot noted with acuity. A suppressed gleam of something akin to satisfaction, perhaps glee at liberation from matrimonial bonds. She claimed an alibi of solitary reading in her boudoir, immersed in a volume of Proust, yet her composure cracked infinitesimally under scrutiny, suggesting concealed motives, financial independence through inheritance, or retribution for years of emotional aridity. Next summoned was Edward Thorne, who slouched into the salon with the indolence of a man burdened by excess and entitlement. He collapsed into an armchair, his tousled auburn hair dishevelled, his brooding brown eyes darting restlessly. "Father was a tyrant with the purse strings," he grumbled, his voice laced with petulance. "Cut my allowance last month over some trifling debts. But poison in a letter? Absurd! I'd sooner challenge him to a duel than resort to such cowardice." Poirot's gaze pierced like a stiletto, detecting a nervous tick in Edward's fidgeting fingers. A betrayal of anxiety or guilt, the timeline, pieced from servant testimonies, placed Edward near the postbox earlier that evening, ostensibly collecting his own correspondence. Psychologically, Edward's profile revealed a man ensnared by resentment and desperation. His dilettante pursuits masked a seething grudge, his schemes potentially escalating from forgery to fatal intervention in pursuit of the Thorne fortune. Miss Clara Beaumont followed, her slender form gliding into the room with the grace of a wraith, golden curls framing a face pale with genuine distress. She perched on the edge of a settee, her grey eyes misted behind spectacles. "I managed all of Lord Thorne's correspondence," she whispered, her voice quavering. "But this letter arrived sealed, unopened by my hand. Oh, the horror of it!" Poirot gentled his tone, yet his observation was unsparing. Her devotion bordered on obsession, a psychological undercurrent that could ferment into jealousy if spurned. A search of her quarters, authorized discreetly, had uncovered a hidden love note penned in her script. Addressed to Archibald, undelivered. Was this a red herring, planted to divert suspicion, or evidence of unrequited passion turned poisonous? Clara's alibi, transcribing notes in the study, yet unverifiable in solitude. Colonel Reginald Fairfax marched in with military precision, his burly frame filling the doorway, scarred cheek twitching faintly. He stood at attention before seating himself rigidly. "Our rivalry was strictly professional," he barked, his steely blue eyes unyielding. "A botched treaty in 25. Thorn undermined me, but I'd settle scores on the field of honor, not with skulking poisons. I was in the billiard room, cue in hand." Poirot discerned the rigid posture as a facade concealing volcanic rage. Fairfax's psychology was that of a warrior scorned, his honor demanding restitution. A cursory glance at his kit bag left in the hall revealed a vial of similar toxin, ostensibly for vermin control during campaigns, but suspiciously apropos. Finally, Mrs. Agnes Croft bustled in, her stout figure clad in starched apron, ruddy cheeks flushed. She curtsied awkwardly, her shrewd dark eyes flickering with wariness. "I served the evening tea, my lord. Sir," she demurred, "nothing more. His lordship was alone with his letters." Poirot noted the shrewd glint in her eyes, a psychological marker of suppressed indignation. Years of imperious commands had brewed a potent resentment. An inconsistency emerged. The grandfather clock's hands had been advanced by 10 minutes, potentially fabricating alibis, and Agnes oversaw the hall's timepieces. As the interviews concluded, Poirot ventured onto the cliffs, the mist swirling about him like veils of suspicion. The sea's roar provided a contemplative backdrop as he stroked his moustache. "The clues entwine like the fog's tendrils," he murmured to himself. "Powder from Victoria's vanity, Edward's debts, Clara's note, a misdirection, Fairfax's vial, Agnes's clock. Suspicions veil the truth, but the grey cells shall penetrate." The day advanced under the fog's oppressive canopy, the hall's inhabitants casting sidelong glances, alliances fracturing as the enigma deepened. Chapter 3. Whispers of Deceit. The afternoon sun, a pallid disk veiled by the lingering fog that clung tenaciously to the Sussex cliffs, cast a diffused luminescence over Ravenswood Hall, transforming the estate into a realm of ethereal ambiguity, where truths and deceptions intertwined like the mist's sinuous tendrils. The English Channel's ceaseless roar provided a sombre underscore, its waves pounding the rocks below with rhythmic inevitability, echoing the relentless pulse of suspicion that now pervaded the household. Within the hall's venerable confines, the atmosphere thickened with unspoken accusations. Servants whispered in shadowed alcoves, their glances laden with conjecture, while the suspects navigated the corridors like phantoms, each step a potential revelation or further obfuscation. The air, heavy with the scent of salt spray and wood smoke from the salon's fire, seemed to hum with the whispers of deceit, as if the very walls conspired to conceal the perpetrator's identity. Hercule Poirot, undaunted by the oppressive ambiance, pursued his inquiry with the unerring precision of a virtuoso dissecting a complex fugue. Having assimilated the initial testimonies, he now ventured deeper into the psyches of the suspects, employing his formidable intellect to unearth concealed verities amid the labyrinth of falsehoods. The salon, with its velvet furnishings and flickering hearth, served as a confessional of sorts, but Poirot extended his scrutiny to private quarters, authorized by the constable's warrant, where secrets lay hidden like missives in sealed envelopes. In Lady Victoria Thorne's boudoir, a sanctuary of feminine refinement adorned with lace doilies and silver-backed brushes upon a vanity of polished rosewood, Poirot discovered a velvet-bound journal nestled within a locked escritoire, yielded open with Hargreaves's reluctant aid. The entries, inscribed in Victoria's flowing cursive, depicted a marriage fraught with discord. vivid recountings of Archibald's purported infidelities during diplomatic sojourns, interlaced with fantasies of retribution that chilled the soul. "He shall rue the day he forsook me," one passage proclaimed, his empire crumbling as dust. Yet, upon meticulous examination, the ink in latter entries appeared fresher, inconsistent with the faded hues of earlier pages, suggesting forgery, a cunningly sewn red herring to implicate the diarist or divert attention from another. Poirot's little grey cell's word, Victoria's psychology, a mosaic of bitterness veiled by elegance, intimated she might engineer such a ruse to shield her innocence or amplify her guilt. Physical clues burgeoned, each a whisper in the chorus of deceit. The faint footprint in the library's carpet, upon comparison with footwear from the suspect's wardrobes, aligned with the delicate sole of Clara Beaumont's kidskin slipper. Yet the impression bore traces of deliberate enhancement, as if pressed with undue force, implying a planted artifact to ensnare the unwary. This misdirection extended to the smudged seal on the fatal envelope, its wax residue matching a candle in Edward's chamber, though the smudge's pattern suggested gloved manipulation, broadening the net of suspicion. Reassembling the suspects for intensified interrogations, Poirot commenced with Edward Thorne, escorting him to the fog-shrouded terrace, where the sea's spray misted the air, heightening the sense of isolation. Edward leaned against the balustrade, his lanky form tense, auburn hair tousled by the wind. "Monsieur Edward," Poirot probed, his voice cutting through the mist like a clarion. "Your pecuniary predicaments, they furnish a motive as compelling as any vendetta. Debts accrue like the tide's relentless advance, and your father's demise would inundate you with inheritance." Edward's brooding brown eyes flashed with defiance, his fidgeting hands clenching the railing. "Preposterous insinuation! Yes, I forged a cheque or two to stave off creditors. Father's parsimony left me no recourse. But murder by poison, I'd sooner throw myself upon these cliffs." His confession to financial chicanery, while illuminating his desperation, served as a red herring. The timeline, corroborated by a valet's sighting of Edward in the stable's post-delivery of the post, tentatively absolved him, though his grudge lingered like the fog. Colonel Reginald Fairfax was next, interrogated in the billiard-room amid the click of ivory balls and the aroma of cigar smoke that clung to the green baize. Fairfax stood rigidly, his scarred cheek twitching. "You persist in this charade," he growled, his steely blue eyes unblinking. "Thorne sabotaged my career. That treaty in 25 was my legacy, pilfered by his machinations. I admit to sending anonymous letters of warning, hoping to unnerve him. But toxin, that's the coward's weapon, not a soldier's." Poirot nodded sagely, detecting the martial honour warped by defeat. Fairfax's admission to epistolary harassment unveiled a pattern of vengeance, yet his alibi, engaged in a solitary game, the cue chalked and table disturbed, held firm, deflecting culpability while deepening the intrigue. Miss Clara Beaumont, summoned to the study with its walls lined by diplomatic tomes, trembled upon the settee, her golden curls disarrayed, grey eyes magnified by spectacles brimming with tears. "Ma petite Clara," Poirot coaxed, his tone avuncular yet incisive. "The affections of the heart can engender profound deceit. You cherished Lord Thorne beyond professional bounds, no? Advances spurned, perhaps." Clara's porcelain cheeks flushed crimson as she nodded, her voice a whisper. "I loved him futilely. From afar, his intellect his command. He rebuffed my subtle overtures, deeming them impropriety. The pain, it consumed me." Her revelation of unrequited passion, painted a portrait of obsession, yet her frailty suggested incapacity for such calculated malice, or a masterful facade. Mrs. Agnes Croft, confronted in the butler's pantry amid shelves of china and silver, stood stoutly, her ruddy cheeks paling slightly. My hidden grudge? Aye, his lordship demoted me years ago over a false theft accusation, pilfered cufflinks, planted by a rival maid. The indignation festers still. Her shrewd dark eyes narrowed, her psychology revealing a reservoir of suppressed fury that could erupt into retribution. Timeline inconsistencies crystallized like frost upon the windows. Archibald's demise pinpointed at 10:05 by his stopped pocket watch, its hands frozen in death's grip, yet multiple witnesses attested to hearing the faint strains of an air gramophone from his library persisting until 10:15. Someone had manipulated the timepiece, fabricating alibis with artful deceit. As twilight encroached, a chilling discovery rent the air. A teacup in Clara's chamber, laced with prussic acid residue, untouched but ominous, a misdirection to silence or frame her. Poirot, retreating to the cliff's edge as the fog thickened anew, contemplated the mosaic. The whispers of deceit resound, he murmured, stroking his moustache. Victoria's forged journal, Edward's forgeries, Fairfax's letters, Clara's love scorned, Agnes's demotion, motives entwine like the mist's embrace, money for one, revenge for others, secrets binding all. The night descended, the hall's lamps flickering like beacons in the gloom, as the enigma swelled toward its inexorable climax. Chapter 4. The Tangled Web. As the mantle of twilight relinquished its hold to the nascent glow of dawn over Ravenswood Hall, the estate stirred from its uneasy slumber, the fog retreating languidly from the cliffs like a reluctant conspirator unveiling its secrets. The English Channel, ever the inexorable sentinel, hurled its waves against the rocks with undiminished vigour. Their rhythmic crashes a counterpoint to the mounting tension within the hall's stone precincts. The turrets, bathed in the tentative light of a sun struggling through the haze, cast elongated shadows across the dukist lawns, as if the edifice itself extended accusatory fingers toward its inhabitants. Inside, the corridors resonated with the subdued cadence of footsteps and murmured consultations, the air redolent with the mingled aromas of fresh-brewed coffee, and the faint pervasive salt tang from the sea. A reminder that isolation amplified the web of deceit entangling all. Hercule Poirot, the indefatigable Belgian sleuth, convened the suspects at the stroke of 9 in the library, the very chamber where Lord Archibald Thorne had met his untimely end. The room, with its towering shelves of diplomatic tomes and the mahogany desk now cleared of its fatal accoutrements, exuded an aura of solemn gravity. The morning light filtered through the arched windows, illuminating the assembled company. Lady Victoria's ethereal poise now edged with fatigue, Edward's lanky form slouched in defiance, Clara's slender figure quivering with apprehension, Colonel Fairfax's burly stance rigid as a sentinel, and Mrs. Croft's stout presence bustling with feigned efficiency, as they seated themselves in a semicircle of high-backed chairs. Poirot, positioned before the desk with his compact frame emanating quiet command, addressed them with resonant authority. "Mes amis," he proclaimed, his voice a masterful orchestration of revelation, "the tangled web of this pernicious crime draws taut. Hidden motives, akin to spiders' silken threads, must now be exposed. Behold, the last will and testament of Lord Archibald Thorne, procured from his solicitor via urgent dispatch." With a flourish, Poirot unfurled the document, its parchment crackling like distant thunder. Read aloud in his precise accent, it disclosed stark truths. Edward's disinheritance in toto, his portion forfeited due to profligate debts and moral lapses, redirecting the estate's bounty to Victoria. A clandestine codicil alluded to Archibald's extramarital dalliances, including a purported affair with Clara, scandalous whispers that elicited sharp intakes of breath, though Poirot swiftly debunked the liaison as fabricated gossip, evidenced by intercepted billets doux forged in an unfamiliar hand. Red herrings abounded like snares in a hunter's thicket. A leather glove, embossed with Fairfax's regimental insignia, was unearthed beneath the desk during a renewed search, ostensibly damning, yet its pristine condition contradicted the dust-laden floor, intimating it had been planted in the interim to ensnare the unwary. The wax seals on prior correspondences, compared meticulously, revealed inconsistencies in composition, some laced with innocuous powders for preservation, others untainted, suggesting selective tampering to mimic a pattern of innocuous deliveries. Poirot's psychological dissections peeled away veneers, exposing the raw sinews of the soul. Victoria's ethereal composure, so assiduously cultivated, masked an emergent hysteria. Her sapphire eyes darted with the frenzy of a caged bird, her hands betraying a quiver that bespoke a conscience besieged by revelations or remorse. Edward's habitual indolence concealed a profound terror. His brooding gaze faltered at the will's pronouncement, his ruddy cheeks paling as the spectre of penury loomed, his psychology a maelstrom of fear and futile scheming. Clara's poised demeanour veiled a nascent cunning. Her grey eyes, behind spectacles, held a calculating sheen, her unrequited affections potentially morphing into manipulative stratagems. Fairfax's martial rigidity betrayed subtle calculations. A fleeting smirk crossed his scarred features when suspicions alighted elsewhere, his honour-bound psyche twisted by vengeful arithmetic. Croft's matronly efficiency hid indignation. Her shrewd dark eyes flashed with repressed fury, years of servitude fermenting into a potent elixir of reprisal. The morning's disclosures yielded to an escalating contretemps that rent the fragile truce. During a mid-morn repast in the dining hall, a grandiose space adorned with ancestral portraits whose austere gazes seemed to adjudicate the living, a sudden snap reverberated like a pistol's report. A slender wire, cunningly affixed to the envelope seal of a decoy letter upon the sideboard, lashed out as Edward reached for it, grazing his cheek and drawing a crimson line. He recoiled with a yelp, clutching his face, his brown eyes wide with alarm. "Good Lord!" Victoria exclaimed, her alabaster hand flying to her throat amid the clatter of silverware. An attempt, or a harbinger? Pandemonium ensued. Clara gasped. Fairfax surged forward with military alacrity, and Croft hastened with a napkin. Poirot, unruffled, examined the wire. Identical in gauge to those used in diplomatic seals, rigged with rudimentary ingenuity. A staged peril, perhaps, he opined, to weave further tangles or deflect the gaze from the true arachnid. Capitalizing on the disarray, Poirot orchestrated private inquisitions in the study, a chamber suffused with the aroma of aged leather and ink, its walls echoing with the ghosts of diplomatic missives. To Victoria, ensconced rigidly before the desk, "Madame, the journal's forgeries, they point to your hand or another's in your service. The ink's freshness betrays the artifice." Her composure splintered. She faltered, her voice a tremulous whisper. I sought to document his betrayals, but some entries were embellished, not by me." Her evasion resonated hollowly, her psychology unveiling a woman ensnared in her own labyrinth, bitterness transmuting into desperate self-preservation. To Clara, in the same chair now warmed by antecedent occupants, "The love notes, ma petite, they bear anomalies in script, forgeries to inflame jealousies." She nodded tremulously, tears anew, but Poirot discerned the cunning glint. She admitted no authorship, intimating a frame contrived to exploit her vulnerability. The clues coalesced like tributaries converging into a torrent. The smudged seal's residue matched none of the suspect's fingerprints, taken that morn for juxtaposition, but its pattern implied deliberate obfuscation. Not an outsider, but an insider simulating anonymity. The tainted teacup from the prior eve, assayed surreptitiously by Poirot with a portable kit, contained prussic traces akin to Fairfax's vial, yet diluted, a feint to intimidate rather than eradicate. As vespers approached, draping the hall in amber shadows pierced by the flicker of gas lamps, Poirot reconvened the cadre in the salon. The fire crackled portentously in the grate, casting grotesque silhouettes upon the tapestries. "The tangled web unravels its strands," he declared, his green eyes alight with deductive fire. "Tomorrow, at dawn's first light, the truth shall be laid bare in its entirety. Until then, vigilance, for the spinner of this web lurks amidst us still." The suspects dispersed, retreating to their sanctuaries with burdened spirits and vigilant gazes. Murmurs echoed through the passages, coalitions fracturing, as the enigma of the sinister letter teetered upon the brink of elucidation. Outside, the fog encroached once more, a harbinger of the revelations to come, or the ultimate concealment of treachery's bitter epistle. Chapter 5. The Revealing Stroke. As the nascent light of dawn gilded the fog-shrouded turrets of Ravenswood Hall, the estate awoke from its nocturnal vigil with a palpable sense of culmination. The English Channel's waves crashing below like the inexorable march of justice. The cliffs, etched with the scars of centuries, stood sentinel over the unfolding denouement, while the mist retreated languorously, as if reluctant to relinquish its veil over the secrets harboured within the Gothic edifice. The lawns, bedewed and glistening, stretched toward the horizon, a verdant canvas upon which the shadows of suspicion would finally be dispelled. Within the hall's venerable precincts, the atmosphere thrummed with electric anticipation. Servants moved with hushed alacrity, their eyes wide with speculation, while the suspects, Victoria's ethereal grace now taut with exhaustion, Edward's indolence fractured by anxiety, Clara's poise on the brink of collapse, Fairfax's rigidity a brittle armour, and Croft's matronly efficiency masking trepidation, converged once more in the library at Poirot's imperative summons. The chamber, suffused with the soft amber glow of morning filtering through the arched windows, retained its aura of intellectual solemnity. The mahogany desk, site of Archibald's fatal encounter, stood barren now, a mute witness to the tragedy, while the shelves of diplomatic tomes loomed like silent judges. The crystal inkstands caught the light, scattering prismatic flecks across the carpet. Illuminating the semicircle of chairs where the assembly seated themselves, Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian with his egg-shaped head, impeccably waxed moustache, and piercing green eyes that penetrated the soul's recesses, positioned himself before the desk, his compact frame radiating the quiet authority of one who wielded truth as a scalpel. "Mes amis," Poirot intoned, his voice a resonant timbre that commanded the room like a conductor's baton summoning the symphony's finale. "The hour of elucidation has dawned. The sinister letter that felled Lord Archibald Thorne, that paragon of diplomacy whose correspondences wove the fates of empires, was no haphazard malediction, but a meticulously crafted instrument of malice. We have traversed the labyrinth of clues, physical vestiges such as the powdery residue and feminine footprint, psychological dissonances in evasions and behaviors, timeline aberrations that twisted like serpentine deceptions, and hidden motives lurking in the shadows of pecuniary desperation, vengeful honor, and scorned affections. Now, Hercule Poirot shall wield the revealing stroke, severing the tangled web to expose the culprit. He paced with deliberate elegance, his patent leather shoes clicking rhythmically upon the parquet, his gaze sweeping the faces before him, each a tableau of concealed turmoil, etched with the lines of deceit and dread. Let us recapitulate the epistolary enigma's strands. The method: prussic acid embedded in the seal, inhaled upon breach, a diplomat's demise, poetic in its perfidy, necessitating familiarity with toxins and access to correspondence. The scene: the library sealed as a tomb, yet suggestive of infiltration through smudged wax and planted prints, a masterful illusion of externality. The suspects, each ensnared by motive as compelling as a sealed pact. Poirot pivoted first to Victoria, her sapphire eyes meeting his with a defiant shimmer. Madame Thorne, your bitterness was of venomous ink. Archibald's neglect, his infidelities chronicled in your journal, the will enriching you beyond measure. The forged entries, the lavender scent upon the desk, yet your love, though eroded, persisted. Your hysteria bespoke grief, not guilt. Non, you are not the architect of this fatal missive. Victoria's alabaster shoulders sagged subtly, a sigh escaping like the unsealing of a long-held breath. Next, Edward slouched in his chair, his auburn hair dishevelled, brown eyes darting like a cornered fox. Monsieur Edward, your desperation was a forged signature, debts towering, disinheritance looming, your father's parsimony a goad. The wax residue from your chamber, the proximity to the post, yet your cowardice, that profound terror of consequence, restrained your hand. Your schemes were petty, not lethal. Edward exhaled raggedly, his sneer dissolving into reluctant alleviation. Poirot's scrutiny alighted upon Clara, her slender form quivering, grey eyes misted behind spectacles. Ma petite Clara, your unrequited devotion was a plaintive postscript, intellectual adoration spurned, the tainted teacup a diversion aimed at you. The footprint matching your slipper, planted as misdirection. Yet your fragility, both corporeal and sentimental, precluded the cold calculus of poison. Your tears veiled purity, not perfidy. Clara buried her porcelain face in her hands, sobs cascading like ink from an overturned well. Mrs. Croft stood stoutly, her ruddy cheeks paling, dark eyes shrewd yet apprehensive. Madam Croft, your indignation was a suppressed memorandum, years of demotions and slights, the manipulated clock affording alibi. The hidden grudge festering like unsealed venom, yet your loyalty, tempered in the crucible of service, proved unbreachable. The glove planted, a snare for another. Croft inclined her greying head, a flicker of gratitude softening her matronly visage. Finally, Poirot whirled toward Colonel Reginald Fairfax, whose burly frame tensed like a coiled spring, steely blue eyes smouldering with barely restrained fury, his scarred cheek twitching. Ah, Colonel Fairfax, the rival whose motive eclipses all, not mere professional discord, but a profound vendetta. The thwarted Treaty of 25, Archibald's sabotage that consigned you to obscurity while he ascended. But deeper, his blackmail via intercepted letters, exposing your colonial indiscretions that could shatter your honor irreparably. Fairfax's imposing form stiffened, his voice a guttural snarl. "Mere conjecture, Poirot. You weave fancies without substance." "Au contraire," Poirot retorted, his moustache curling with triumphant acuity. "The clues coalesce against you. The prussic acid, sourced from your campaign arsenal, the vial's label matching precisely. Entry via the concealed cliff path, knowledge from your reconnaissance during prior visits, its brambles undisturbed save for your boot prints. The footprint falsified with Clara's slipper. A red herring sewn in haste. The watch reset to fabricate alibis, your military precision at play. And the damning seal, a button from your uniform, clutched in Archibald's dying grasp, concealed in his palm until my grey cells discerned its import, embossed with your regimental crest, torn in the brief struggle as he recognized his assailant. The library fell into a profound silence, the weight of accusation suspending like a held breath. Fairfax paled, his rigid facade fracturing like parchment under strain. "Curse your infernal grey cells, Poirot. He destroyed me, undermined the treaty, then blackmailed me with those damned letters from the colonies." I confronted him, demanded cessation. He mocked me, and the toxin was at hand, embedded in the seal I prepared. His confession erupted, a deluge of pent rancour and remorse. Constable Hargreaves advanced, manacles glinting in the morning light, as Fairfax was escorted away, his defiance ebbing into resignation. The assembly dispersed, the hall's oppressive shroud lifting with the ascending sun. Poirot lingered by the window, gazing upon the receding fog. The human epistle, it inscribes its own tragedy, he philosophized softly. Ambition, betrayal, the fatal stroke of correspondence, such is the enigma of the soul. As the day burgeoned, Ravenswood Hall exhaled its enigmas, the sinister letter's shadow dissipating into memory. Victoria, now mistress in earnest, contemplated a future unshackled. Edward, chastened, vowed reformation. Clara sought solace in new employ. Croft resumed her duties with quiet vindication. The diplomat's legacy endured, a cautionary missive in the annals of intrigue. Thus the curtain descended upon Poirot's fatal correspondence, justice inscribed in indelible ink.